I've been a trucker for over a decade now, and while I've had my fair share of strange encounters on the road, nothing compares to what happened to me in 2019. I was hauling a load of furniture through a remote stretch of highway in Montana. It was late, probably around 2 or 3 in the morning, and the road was completely deserted. No streetlights, no other cars, just me and the endless blackness of the night. The only light came from my truck's headlights, which barely seemed to cut through the thick darkness. I remember feeling uneasy for no particular reason, like something was off. The kind of feeling you get when you know you're being watched, even though you can't see anyone. I chalked it up to being tired and kept driving, eager to get to the next rest stop. About an hour into the drive, I saw something up ahead on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or a coyote. But as I got closer, I realized it was a person, a woman, standing completely still on the shoulder of the highway. She was wearing a long white dress that looked old and tattered, and her hair was hanging in front of her face. She wasn't waving for help or trying to flag me down. She was just standing there, staring at the ground. I slowed down as I passed her, trying to get a better look, but she didn't move, not even a flinch. I thought about stopping to see if she needed help, but something about her gave me the creeps. I decided to keep going, figuring she was probably just some hitchhiker or someone whose car had broken down. Still, I couldn't shake the image of her standing there, so still and lifeless. About 10 minutes later, I saw her again. Same white dress, same long hair covering her face, standing on the side of the road. My stomach dropped. There was no way she could have gotten ahead of me. I hadn't passed any turnoffs or side roads, right, and I was driving at least 60 miles per hour. It didn't make any sense. This time, I didn't slow down. I just kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that maybe I'd imagined seeing her the first time. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Another 10 minutes passed, and I saw her again. This time, she was standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, my truck screeching to a stop just a few feet away from her. My heart was pounding in my chest as I stared at her through the windshield. She didn't move. She didn't even look up. She just stood there, her head tilted slightly to the side like she was listening for something. I honked the horn, hoping to scare her off, but she didn't react. I rolled down the window and yelled, asking if she needed help, but she didn't respond. The only sound was the low hum of my engine and the faint rustling of the wind. I was about to get out of the truck when she suddenly turned and walked off the road, disappearing into the darkness. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. My gut was telling me to turn around and get the hell out of there, but I didn't want to backtrack. I figured if I just kept driving, I'd eventually reach a town or a gas station where I could stop and collect myself. I drove for another 20 minutes without seeing her again, and I started to think maybe it was over. But then, out of nowhere, my truck's engine sputtered and died. The headlights flickered and went out, leaving me in complete darkness. I tried turning the key, but the engine wouldn't start. My heart was racing as I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the cab to check under the hood. As I was fumbling with the flashlight, I heard it, a soft, shuffling sound coming from behind me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Slowly, I turned around, shining the flashlight into the darkness. At first, I didn't see anything, but then I caught a glimpse of movement. Something was standing just beyond the edge of the light, watching me. It was her. She was closer now, her face partially visible through her hair. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her eyes were completely black. She took a step toward me, and I stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. I scrambled to pick it up, but by the time I shone it back in her direction, she was gone. I didn't waste any time. I climbed back into the truck, locked the doors, and tried the engine again. This time it started. I floored it, speeding down the highway as fast as I could. I didn't care about the load, the speed limit, or anything else. I just wanted to get as far away from her as possible. I didn't stop until I reached a truck stop about an hour later. I parked in the lot, locked the doors, and sat there for a long time, trying to calm down. I thought about telling someone what had happened, but I knew they wouldn't believe me. Hell, I wasn't even sure I believed it myself. To this day, I have no idea who or what that woman was. I've driven that same stretch of highway a few times since then, but I've never seen her again. Still, every time I pass through, I can't help but feel like she's out there, waiting. I've been driving trucks for about 3 years now, and while the job has its ups and downs, I've learned to deal with the long hours and isolation. But there's one night I'll never forget, something that still makes my skin crawl every time I think about it. It was a routine delivery, or at least it was supposed to be. I was driving from northern Pennsylvania to a small town in Kentucky. The trip was about 10 hours, and I'd already been on the road for most of the day. I decided to push through the night to make my delivery on time. The roads were quiet, and the only light came from my headlights and the occasional flicker of a passing street lamp. Around 2 a.m., I started feeling the weight of exhaustion creeping in. My eyelids were heavy, and I knew I needed to stop soon. I spotted a rest area sign up ahead and decided to pull over. It wasn't a big rest stop, just a small parking lot with a couple of vending machines and a single building that looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. But it was better than nothing. I parked my truck and stepped out into the cold night air, hoping it would wake me up a bit. The place was eerily quiet, and the only sound was the faint hum of the vending machines. I walked over to grab a soda, but as I got closer, I noticed one of the machines was flickering, its light struggling to stay on. The other machine was completely dark, its glass cracked and smeared with something I didn't want to think about. I put a few coins into the working machine and pressed the button for a soda. Nothing happened. Frustrated, I hit the side of the machine, and that's when I heard it, a faint sound, like shuffling, coming from the building behind me. I froze, my hand still on the machine. The sound stopped. I turned around slowly, scanning the area, but there was nothing there, just the dark outline of the building and the empty parking lot. Telling myself it was probably just an animal, I grabbed my soda and headed back to my truck. As I climbed into the cab, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I locked the doors and started the engine, eager to get back on the road. But as I glanced in my side mirror, I saw something, or someone, standing near the edge of the parking lot. It was just a shadowy figure, barely visible in the dim light, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. I told myself it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me and pulled out of the rest area. The road ahead was empty, and I tried to focus on the drive, but I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me. Every so often, I glanced in my mirrors, half expecting to see that figure again. About an hour later, I started hearing strange noises coming from the back of the truck. It sounded like faint tapping, almost like someone was knocking on the inside of the trailer. My heart started racing. I knew the trailer was locked, and there was no way anyone could have gotten in. But the tapping continued, growing louder and more erratic. I pulled over onto the shoulder of the highway, my hands shaking as I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out of the cab. The night was deathly quiet, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my boots. I walked around to the back of the trailer, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The lock was still in place, just as I'd left it. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to open the doors and check inside. The trailer was empty, just as it should have been. I shone the flashlight around, but there was nothing there. No sign of anything that could have made the noise. I closed the doors, locked them again, and got back into the truck, trying to convince myself it was just the wind or some loose cargo shifting around. I started driving again, but the unease only grew stronger. I kept glancing in my mirrors, and that's when I saw it. A face, pale and gaunt, staring at me from the small window in the back of the cab. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest. When I turned around, there was nothing there. Just the empty curtain swaying slightly, as if someone had just moved it. I didn't stop again until I reached my destination. By the time I arrived, the sun was starting to rise, and the events of the night felt like a bad dream. But when I went to unlock the trailer, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Scratches. Deep, jagged scratches on the inside of the doors, as if someone or something had been trying to claw their way out. I don't know what happened that night, and I don't think I ever will. But I've never stopped at a rest area in the middle of the night since, and I never will.